So hello everybody. Lovely to see such a full room and lots of smiling faces on this sunny day in Glasgow. My name is Kaila Bloomfield and I'll introduce myself shortly, but you have joined me today to talk about Microsoft licensing and how to make sure the licenses you purchase really get the maximum benefit for your organisation. So before we get into anything, the only reason we are all here today is because we've got lots of amazing sponsors. They mean we can provide this for free, and also they mean that we, people like myself, can really try and give you this support both inside these sessions and outside to help actually give you free access to information technology, whether for your organisations or from a training perspective. So we like to do a bit of a shout out. And the biggest one has to be Microsoft. I see some Microsoft people in the room joining as well. But we also have Proximo 3, who is a training provider and consultancy specialist. We have PwC, where I am ironically from, HSO, AIS, and Docs 42. Then also we have our gold sponsors, which are Incremental, Squared Up, Tiski, ATech, DQ Global, Companion, CloudThing, and Experian. So thank you very much to all of them, and thank you very much to you all for joining us in the room or online. So who am I? My name, as I've mentioned, is Kaila Bloomfield. By trade, technical trade, I'm an enterprise architect. But what that realistically means is I can help implement business systems from a technology perspective, so data, integrations, reporting, where the system doesn't quite fit what you need, trying to make that work for you. My background is for back office, so finance systems, retail, things like that, but also going into ways to help those systems meet what you need, using no or low code solutions, so we try not to over-customize anything, make it a bit future-proof. Also, as you'll hear about in the closing summit tomorrow, I am also building the Iberian Summit. So hopefully, when you hear about the launch tomorrow, you'll be able to maybe come and join us. But you can reach out to me at any time through any of the forums. I do tend to try and reply, so if I don't, feel free to have a go at me. I like to make sure I can chat to you all guys. And realistically, what I always try to say to people is business transformation does not have to be complicated. It can be simple and it can be fast. So if it's not, it means something somewhere's going wrong. So why are we here? Anyone who is already a Microsoft customer knows that licensing is a nightmare. It is constantly changing. Depending on who you ask, they will give you a different answer. And sometimes the people you ask don't even know how they realistically work, so sometimes you can ask the wrong questions or get the different answers, or people will try and avoid the answer as much as possible because they don't want to risk saying something that's wrong. And what we really often see, and this is something Microsoft is working so hard to try and help resolve, is that customers aren't even using their licenses they have to the maximum extent. You know, they're purchasing these licenses, spending all this money, and sometimes only getting sort of 80 to 90% of the true value. So that's what today's about, to try and talk about how, as organisations, can you really get the maximum value out of these licenses. And we will be covering Microsoft 365, Dynamics 365, and Power Platform to give you that rounded view, because generally speaking, you won't only just purchase one of them, you go more into a suite, or you'll have access to more of the suite that you don't even know about. So where do you begin? When we talk about licensing, you have to purchase them somehow. You can just go and buy them yourself through sort of your the Microsoft portals, things like that. But when you go into being more organisational, business focused, you want to centralise, you want to get discounts. Everybody loves discounts. You have to start talking to someone. If you're a big organisation or you're a strategic organisation or industry for Microsoft, you can actually talk to them about enterprise agreements. They're great. You can get really big discounts because Microsoft know that actually working together you can do some real great things. But also to a smaller organisation, it's not really actually going to happen. where you go into the CSP agreements, which are third-party license providers. They can give you varied discounts, it's up to them. And also, they can be an ISV provider or a consultancy firm, systems integrator. So generally speaking, they will have additional reasons that they want to be providing licenses, whether it's their own solutions or things like that. And everyone can go through them. So it's generally, if you want to simplify your procurement model when you're purchasing or changing the number of licenses you have, CSP agreements are great because you have someone to face off to you, help explain the licenses you have, help talk about the different types of ways that you can purchase and manage those license agreements. So it starts to formalise rather than more of these models where you would go and manage that yourself. So before I dig in too much, I wanted to focus on Microsoft 365. So out of everyone in the room, whose company they work with uses Outlook, Word, Excel, Office 365's new rebranded Microsoft 365? See, all of these hands. This is becoming an industry standard. It has been for a long time. We are using Azure Active Directory en masse now. The pandemic made it even more a dependent item for organisations to go on and do the remote working, increase collaboration, give that access to all of your information and documentation through things like SharePoint or OneDrive, depending on which one you're using. So all of you within this room have either an E3 or E5 license. What actually happens, though, in the organisations, they switch off access to other elements. One of those elements being the Power Platform. Now, that's massively detrimental to what you can do as an organisation. We don't want to. For Microsoft and for your organisation to help evolve, as part of this license where you can literally pay no more money, you can build Canvas apps, you can embed them in Teams for where you're working, you can connect them to local drives, your Excels, all of your sort of data sources. Generally speaking, most of them are compatible. If you have premium connectors there, you would have to pay for a specific license for that. But you'd be surprised how many connectors are available just on E3 and E5 licenses. And you can get these functionalities, you're paying nothing. As an organisation, you can have someone sitting in a finance team. Currently, they'll do consolidation or they'll do some sort of reporting where they're taking all of that data and doing some Excel formulas. They don't actually need to do that. They could use a flow. They could make a basic Canvas app. If you're trying to gather information from people in your organisation, you can build that. You can automate that. You're not using extra licenses to do any of that, and you're empowering people in your organisation to go and fix a problem you probably don't know exists. These are the types of things that we know organisations are not always taking advantage of. And it's there may be reasons for that. Usually it's concerns about data security or concerns about the ability to control what people are building. But you can put those controls in place. Dataverse has full flexibility of the security model to put these controls in place, to allow people in your organisation to fix these problems with no extra cost, whilst also putting these controls and security of data, making sure it's centralised. You can do that, and you can do that and front that in Dataverse, which means that your organisation is working in one place. This is what we're going to. We're walking towards this new world where we can do that. When you do start talking more complex, we have CRM. Every organisation has some sort of customer management solution. And whether you're using Dynamics 365 or not, maybe you would be interested in looking at it because you already are starting to do other Microsoft products as a stack. When people talk about Power Platform, they talk about it over here, and they talk about customer engagement over here. What most people don't talk about is customer engagement is actually a Power Platform app. That's the customer engagement came first, and then there's a genius sitting in Seattle, and he said, oh, this is a brilliant framework. Why don't we let people have the framework, not just the app? That's what happened. So when you talk about access to CRM, and when you have these full users on CRM, they have full access to build apps. They have full access to help evolve your organization. Again, this is something that within organizations we'll say to people, well, we don't really want people to have that, or we need to put some controls in it. We're concerned about data security. And the way it works with team members, yes, you are much more limited. I mean, you can extend the team member app, but it has to be in the context of the team member app. You can't really, they're more limited. But the messaging really is, if you've got CRM, use it. Use a Power Platform. They're one in the same. And as an organisation, it's just an empowerment tool. We've seen incredibly creative tools and information solutions come from people like Keith Watling. If you don't know that name, go and have a look. He used to drive buses. He got his hands on the Power Platform. He loves the E3 and E5 access. That's what he used to have. You've got Samit Sani, used to be a security guard, non-technical. They got access to the Power Platform and made mass savings on their organisation for making basic apps and then turning them into business and organisational savings. That's because their organisations allowed it, allowed that change, allowed that access. But it does get more complicated because they're the most simple of the solutions. Now we go into more of my background, of the ERP solution, your finance system. I would love to say it's as simple as the CRM solution. Unfortunately, I would be lying to you. And that's just being honest. For all intents and purposes, we want and do brand Dynamics 365 as one platform. And it is becoming much, much closer. But where I've just said, oh, the CRM solution is built on the Power Platform and they're one thing, the finance system isn't. So Microsoft went away to fix this problem with dual write. And dual write's been around now for a few years, still growing, it's still learning, we all are. But it can mean that some elements of access are different. And this is one of the biggest gaps that I personally see, because it's much more common when you see a customer who's implemented CRM to use Power Platform. It's significantly less common for organisations that use finance to use the Power Platform. And I find it really interesting because, again, these full users who have your finance licenses, they do have full access to the Power Platform, same as these CRM users. They can build solutions on the Power Platform, they can access them. And that starts you thinking, okay, in your finance team, one thing that we've recently done as an organisation, we had a company who had finance, so that implicitly means they have the Power Platform, but they were going to buy a third-party OCR solution. So hang on, you've got this extra cost here, right? You've got a third-party ISV that needs to come in, scan their invoices to import them, just to help basic manual process automation. They can do this on the Power Platform to no cost, no additional cost. These are the sort of things that we're not seeing enough of done by organisations. These are the sort of very simple, basic changes that can be built by people within organisations if they're given access. You've got someone sitting at a desk taking and opening all of the invoices or monitoring a mailbox where they come in as an attachment. Well, actually, you have access to go and build a tool that will scan that mailbox day and night for all the invoices that come in. And what's the most interesting thing about it is, yes, okay, it has a current limit on multi-pages, but that's being resolved. And at the same time is you have 100% accuracy on any text that is printed. So anything that uses any standard font, that's 100% accuracy. These are the types of silly little things that organisations could really empower them. And usually when you have a hesitant leadership team who are not sure whether they want to grant access, they don't want to grant access. You have people who are not quite so sure. If you do little wins like that, that actually then have a larger impact because maybe that resource can do other things, or maybe they can get rid of those ISV solutions that usually are probably 5 years old and not quite doing what they were originally intended to do. Suddenly people start getting a bit brave. They start getting a bit excited about what's going on and saying, actually, well, if we can do that, what more can we do? How can we go and change things? How can we gather information? If you have, I work sometimes in councils. Some councils support expenses for teachers. Well, then they're non-usual staff members, so you don't want to pay loads of money for them to have access to your business systems because they're not really staff members, but you want to gather expense information. Build a Canvas app. You can attach the receipts, gather basic information, store it centrally, import it from a journal. That's zero cost. But actually, how many people have we just empowered to do something online? How many business staff have we just freed up from carrying around papers, trying to match things? Sometimes it's going wrong. Sometimes it's not being matched accurately. Things get lost. People get mispaid. You've got no additional cost here. And going back to Keith, going back to Samit, this is not something I have to do for you. This is not something a consultancy has to do for you. And people like myself, we go out of our way to make sure that we are available to anyone if they need a bit of help and a guidance or how to get started. And these sort of changes empower people. Exactly what happened with Keith and Samit, to be fair. They now came into technology. They're not developers, they're not someone with a technical background. They're an everyday person that just got a little bit inquisitive. And they built an entire career out of it whilst also helping their organisations. These are the sort of savings that businesses can make. And even if then there's the concerns, oh, well, maybe people will leave. Well, the platform's simple enough, just make more people, educate more people, give them the opportunity, give them the access. Allow and expose these Power Platform components that you get for free with all of these other tools and systems that you're building. Because every person that comes in that organisation will see a different problem that nobody's seen before. Or they'll see a different way to fix a problem that nobody's seen before. The other thing that I really, really wanted to cover, and I think it's the most important, is starting to talk about when do you start using these licenses. So, especially in finance transformation, but also to an extent in customer transformation in complex organisations, you have to buy these licenses up front, right? Because Microsoft won't give you the software until you've bought them. Usually there's a minimum license count you have to buy, but you want to buy the full amount because you then get access to, I don't know, customer support or enhanced support, things like that. So suddenly you've got this massive bill that you're starting to take on as an organisation. You're going to do I'm talking about in this context, 8 or 9 month program, but some of these go into 18 months. And all your senior leadership team and all your businesses are saying, I'm spending all this money on consultancy and licenses and environments and infrastructure. And it's a bit like, okay, regardless of what you've just bought, Microsoft 365, CRM, ERP, you do have those licenses and you have that access. And there's things you can do with those licenses that you don't need to do at the end of this 6-month program. Who's actually saying that after this 18-month program, that's when you're going to give these licenses to these users? Because the finance environment, for example, they can't access it until you give them access to it. But if you did go and buy, 200 finance user licenses, the average Power Platform enablement program is weeks to months. Training, if you go to a hack like we did yesterday, you can learn the basics of Power Platform within 1 day with people who do this as a day job to empower these people. So on your day 0, when you purchase those licenses, you can start doing those cool little apps I've just talked about. Why do people think when they buy these licenses they have to wait until the core part of that program is delivered to provide access to any of these things? I mean, it's never quite made sense to me. I've got someone, have you got an opinion on this? I've got a lot of nods.
Yeah, my part is this is just like my world that you're talking about. My thing is all splitting around is, do you need your 100 licenses day one, or can you have 10 licenses day one, or finance like to, you've got a budget, spend it now, and sort of thing.
Well, and so I'll just repeat for anyone that's online, the argument is, do you buy them all on day one? And I think this is the conversation. You will get additional benefits from whichever supplier. We don't need to just talk about Microsoft in this context. We can talk about any vendor at this point. If you start spending loads of money up front, you're going to get loads of attention, loads of support, loads of access. You will. So there is a conversation, you know, even with CRM, in most cases you have to buy one license up front. For ERP, you minimum have to buy 20. But if you're a more complex organisation, the extra value you get from buying all of the licenses up front, it could be critical to your ability to turn it around. But it does go back to this question, but at the same time, if you buy all those licenses up front, and within 2 months, you have organisations which are starting to build flows and apps, that during this 9-month period, you're putting in workarounds to processes. Because let's take it and think of it a different way again. You're about to embark on a transformation journey. You need the people from your organisation that understand how your business works to be on that programme. Are you going to go out and get resources to backfill them? Or are you going to use the Power Platform to automate 50% of what they were doing with these paper-based processes whilst you do your programme? Because we always talk about workarounds, right? Or especially if we're doing a phased delivery approach, and we say, oh, we've got to put this temporary thing in place here or temporary thing there. Usually that ends up in an Excel somewhere or a paper-based process or someone dual keying. Well, do you have to? If you've got someone internally who, you know, maybe you've just got someone who's come out of a university, right, a graduate, really want to get in, they still have that hunger to learn, they want to tinker, you give them an app, give them a license. So actually, okay, I've got this problem. I want this person to not spend 4 hours of his week doing this job. Suddenly, you've got a less impact of your project that you're doing because you've enabled your licenses and you've just given them to someone in the organisation. It doesn't even mean that they're going to be that person that has that license after they go live. Maybe that was a license that your management accountant would need after you go live, because he would need a full user license to build what he's built. But you'd have that license just sitting there. You've got this interesting situation here. When you buy these licenses in a quantity, nobody minds who has it. And then by the time you go live, you might think, actually, he's turned into an expert now, so I am going to buy a Power Platform license for him, so he can keep doing this, because my new finance system never fixes all my problems. I have other problems that are residual around the edges. So I can then get him doing more, because he's just fixed these things that we just needed to fix to free up some time. But now he can fix more things. He can fix bigger problems. I've created a skilled engineer that can really help my organisation, and they'll feel great about themselves because they're having some fun, they're playing with new tools and technology. They'll love it, you know? And as an organisation, you're getting maximum benefit out of this. They would have just sat there for 6 months, 9 months. The licence is just costing you some money while you build a finance system or a sales system. It's not really anything I don't think is challengeable, but it's just not something I can't ever say I've seen it happen. I think it's interesting. So what I then want to go on to is, what about organisations that are talking about finance and CRM? This is an increasing trend massively right now. Usually these organisations, they've done CRM first or finance first. That does add an element of complexity, because if you don't start it thinking you end up with both, maybe you make decisions that you're going to have to undo. A case and example would be sometimes when CRM is implemented, there's additional finance type capability created in it because they need to patch a gap because maybe they're on a legacy finance system that doesn't quite do what the CRM needs. So again, Power Platform's filled that little niche in there. But when you actually do go and you do this, and why this is becoming so common in the market is the realization of how much money you save. Now, if you had CRM and you had Sage, as an example, you will have to buy a Sage license for every single person in your organization that would need access to it, for your expenses, for whatever, even just to go and do base functionality. And it's the same for HR, because when we talk about ERP, we are covering HR as well. So if you want to use basic HR capabilities, again, that would be a completely new license for this user. Now, if you had Dynamics 365 for CRM, and you just have, I don't know, the HR or finance system, so your business users en masse would need to submit expenses or timesheets or update their employee profile. Every single member of your CRM team doesn't need an extra license for that. Now, hang on. You've literally just told me every single member of my CRM doesn't need an extra license. But now all of a sudden they can submit expenses. They can keep their employee profile up to date. They can submit all of their timesheets. If I went over to an Equinity or an Oracle, I'd have to buy an extra license for all of them. And also, I'd have to build a custom interface. Now I'm starting to see these costs rise. I'm starting to understand that this is going to be more expensive because I need to figure out how to make these systems talk to each other. That's one problem. That's just in my project. But then for the duration I have these two isolated systems, I'm missing Microsoft's key message that actually if you do one platform, if you align yourself to one provider, you will save money going forward on those users. And then if we 360 it, it's the same. Because anytime you have this team member license, this is agnostic of what system you have. So it doesn't matter if you use HR or if you use retail. You can use finance or you can use the supply chain warehouse. They have read access across the platform. So if they only need basic functionality on any other app, they have read access across the platform. They have that access to exist. The only time you actually have to have an additional license is if they need, more significant. So we'll talk about, we've got a senior sales clerk or something who wants to go in the finance system because they want to see the up-to-date records of invoicing and payments and billing, things like that. They don't need a full user license. I mean, last time I checked, it's £140, I think, for a finance full user license that you would need. Or if it's, again, a third-party solution, a different solution, they'd need an administrator type license for that because that's significant access. For Microsoft, they've got add-on licenses now. So that significantly cuts that cost right out. And ultimately, excuse me, oh no, it's okay. Just get it out. That is enough saving. Ooh. Dying on sound. Oh dear. Feel free to finish. It's all good. Oh dear. Right. Whew. It's a good job I'm not on stage or anything. Oh dear. So yeah. It must be this slide. Okay. So yeah, that's an additional saving. I'm going to move on from this one. I've decided to slide.
Maybe I can ask a question to your last slide.
Go for it.
There is a team member license on the ERP side of the house. You wrote that full read access, team member access to ERP. You mean CRM or you mean really ERP?
So if you have a team member license, it is agnostic of ERP or CRM. So ultimately, Microsoft don't differentiate, even when you purchase it. So when you have a licensed user, what that actually does is if you grant them access to the application, they can then have that read access and also the, they call it self-service access. So any basic capability access, and that would provide either access to the team member app on CRM or the self-service portals in finance. So it ends up, that's why it's both. It's technically neither, if that makes sense.
Because the team member license from the ERP side has access as well to the CRM side?
As long as you've got enough full user licenses of the other. So basically, within your organisation, if you've got a finance system with if you've got the minimum licenses that needs for full user, what that ultimately leads you to is you can have that user accessing either or both, because you've got access to the software as an organisation because you've got enough full user licenses. So when you've brought the applications and you've got both full users on the ERP and the CRM, your third person here, that team member person, if you grant them access, they can have both and they don't need an additional. But it's obviously caveated on, you have to have the full user licenses to grant you access to the software. And that's about that minimum user license need that we mentioned, if that makes sense. I think I've stopped dying now. When you have both applications, one thing really to consider though, and it comes a little bit back to what we discussed earlier, when you've done CRM first and maybe you put a little bit of a custom solution in there to facilitate the need. Microsoft have a term and it's called multiplexing. And it's, you could go on about multiplexing for hours. And the worst thing about it is, it's ultimately defined by an opinion. So you can sort of be clear-cut-ish if you're multiplexing or not. And even then, if you start talking to Microsoft and you'll say, okay, I'm going to build this solution, it'll be, well, in what context, with what customers and what users and what systems. So it's very difficult to definitely know, even for Microsoft, if you are multiplexing or not. And as much as we try and simplify it, it's still complicated. Ultimately, Chris Huntingford, his famous words are, if it feels wrong, it probably is. Multiplexing is a term to define if you are trying, say, I could have, let's go back to the invoices. If I have someone manually creating sales orders and invoices, to do that throughput of 1,000 a day, I would need a team of 5 people. If I create a customization, that means all of that is done by one license, then I've done that to avoid licensing costs. And also, when you're talking, and this is why it's after the CRM conversation, if you're talking about building something in CRM, and what is really common, and nobody's told Microsoft yet, is that finance elements are fronted in the CRM system. Because a finance license is really expensive. In comparison to a sales license, it's quite different. And the argument is, well, my sales team needs access to this invoicing or billing data because when they're in the call centre or when they're checking up on their customers, they need to know if they're paying their bills. Well, they need it to be up-to-date information. That's technically multiplexing because what you've done is you've exposed data over there to avoid them having to buy a finance license to see it here. And it's sort of where the add-on license came in and why it came on, because it ultimately means it's cheaper to do that now where you would have used to have needed a full user license, which you don't anymore. If you are trying to avoid it, and if you don't want to get caught out, because what is worth making key here, Microsoft are putting in technical controls on this. They are building a framework in Dataverse, in Dynamics, to help them check nobody's doing this. And that is restricted entities. And that is coming in with the Office 365 portal and the admin centres. And what it means, and if you don't know what an entity is actually, an entity is a simplified view of your data. So in old world, if you wanted to see where your customers were, you'd have 10 tables and you'd have to go get a developer over there somewhere to pull them together and help you see customer data. An entity has all of that customer data just in one view. It's like you're viewing it in an Excel. What Microsoft have done is they've specifically listed entities you're not allowed to touch. And they're saying if you're touching them, you need a license for it. So a common thing would be a configuration table or, specific tables that mean it is core functionality in either CRM or finance and operations that you can't justify you're using without a license. And they list it. So keep an eye on them, but also in the tools when someone's tinkering. They will generally know they're tinkering. And this again, if it feels wrong, it probably is. They generally know they're tinkering. But another one is what we was mentioning about the finance feature duplication. If you're building something that exists in one of the other apps, in one of the Dynamics 365 apps, you are multiplexing. The only way you can get around it or away from it is you can find a justifiable difference for the users and the functionality they're adding. So you can say, I need this core capability because I'm extending this additional functionality. And then that's why I need to do it this way. I can't do it any other way. So that's where it comes down to this opinion. There are scenarios and there are justifiable reasons for you to have to replicate capability if the specific user base is isolated from what you would be able to reasonably grant within the physical application produced by Microsoft. And there are cases where Microsoft do this themselves, If you go into Power Platform templates, because we as a community and Microsoft give you free downloadable templates, which is a great place to start if you're an organisation just trying to get up and running with this access that you've already got. There's one for expenses. Well, expenses, actually, in Dynamics 365 is in the finance and project operations modules. But there's a template where you can just deploy expenses. That's feature duplication. But you're not going to buy an entire finance system just to be able to get expenses in a Power App, And this is about that justifiable difference.
Just ask on that. So if like you've got allow many users to request an invoice or something like that, certain data maybe some referential data.
Yeah.
If that was going to a central
that okay? Or because of the data, they might have a team member to see the data, but all of them, there's someone going, click yes, I'm happy with this, I approve it, and they're doing 95% effectively the invoice creation, but not actually doing the task.
So generally, no. The way I like to explain it from
Can you please wrap up the question?
oh yes, I can. So what he's asking is that if you have a process where you need approval for that process to go to a central team, so you have many people that will raise the original request, and then you're pushing that request into a central team that will process, approve, and then upload. Well, the people making that initial request, they're not licensed. You know, they will be somewhere out in the world, and you have then your central team that then have to do the rest. So by its most simple terms, arguably that's what I was just saying. You've got loads of people that are raising this request, whether that's an order, but then you're filtering into one team. That's not, in my definition of it, it wouldn't be multiplexing. And generally speaking, the way I like to define it, which is slightly different to Chris, Microsoft understand your infrastructure based on how many licenses you buy, because that helps them understand your user base, your concurrent usage, your transactional volumes. If you're doing something, that means the number of users you have in your system, it's improportionate to the number of transactions you're going to process. They're going to give you a really small box and you're going to moan it's really slow. So if you're doing something, that means that how many transactional elements you're processing in your system are significantly higher than the amount of users you have, you're probably not buying the right licenses. And for finance, it's really interesting because we do have a special license for interfaces, because we will have commonly a procurement system, you know, or a separate isolated sales or invoicing system. So you can't tell me, oh no, you're not allowed to import them in an interface, but I'm not going to buy all these licenses. Well, there's a license that's for that. So if you suddenly have 10,000 invoices you're processing a month, well, you need a bigger box, but actually you're really efficient and you've got a finance team of 5 people. That's how you do it. And actually it's not, that's inexpensive. So on your, team, no, I wouldn't say that scenario is multiplexing, but if you're seeing that significant transactional volume, it'd be worth checking how you can make sure that doesn't lead you into a scenario where you don't have the size infrastructure you need, because Microsoft do then check that proportionality, which is then when they'll start knocking on your door and saying, well, why is this? Why is your consumption so high?
I have a question about your scenario. You said
Yep.
surfacing F&O information inside Dynamics.
Yeah.
In the previous slide, you said that a Teams license gives you only access to everything.
Yeah.
If you're in CRM, you have a full CRM license, and that should cover everything that Teams cover.
Yeah.
So why don't you have full read access to ERP with just a Dynamics license?
So you do. You have full read access, but it's if you want to do anything else.
You can surface their
Yeah.
information from F&O, you just can't change it.
But as soon as you want to start updating the field, it's similar in CRM, if you think about it. A team member can see everything, but they can't use the functionality. They can't do anything with it.
So you can surface like a credit limit.
Yes, but usually in that scenario I was talking about, they'll want to update the invoice information or the banking information, or they'll want to register that something's happened. And that's when it treads into that extra water, because they'll want to say that this is now what's been billed, or activate something that says send a customer a bill now. Well, that's finance. And then that's multiplexing. But just to go back on the question, it's about at what point does the read-only access convert into multiplexing if you have read-only access for everything when you have a Dynamics license?
More of an observation and like your viewpoint on this.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm an independent functional consultant for F&O, so moving from one implementation to another.
Yeah.
What I see is that there's never a matter, or almost never a matter of, oh, we have a license. Organizations don't think in terms of, we have a license, what can we do with it? And also the structure of F&O is that you build the security roles, and depending on what you put into them, is going to trigger consumption of one license or another. So in my experience, it's almost never a matter of let's build a role based on a certain license consumption. It's more a matter of, oh, we have 3 people. These 3 people must access the system to process and solve it. Please make it happen with a security roles. And it's later on, maybe a question of what licensing we're using. Can we design the access to the system in a better way? So my doubt to that is, my perplexity on this is that there's no simple way of seeing from an overview, from a single point, what each license is access to F&O, as opposed to having to basically build that to yourself and then seeing retroactively what
So the question, if I break it down, is actually on, you're saying on day 0, they wouldn't know how many or what licenses they would need as an organisation, generally speaking. And my challenge back to that would be, well, there's no day a management accountant wouldn't need a full user licence. There's no day a AP administrator wouldn't need it. Regardless of which process you put in place, they are full user licenses. Now, as a partner or as an SI, when a customer comes to me and says, oh, we think we want a finance system, I have to do exactly that. Now, you know, I always put a variance in, so I'd say 80% correct. There's sometimes quirks that will push someone from a team member to an activity or a full, you know, and we try and avoid that when we're defining the processes for an organisation to minimise their licences. But ultimately, whether you're talking CRM or F&O, you're only really considering 2 licenses, full or team member. And if you're doing something that is significant, you are having a full user licence. So on your day 0, you can look at your finance team and say 90% of them will be full user licence. It's only the real basic AP clerks that may need or be able to get away with a lower one. And that's how you would know, okay, we will have these licenses earlier, what can we do with them? But I agree with your statement, they don't think of what can we do with them. They don't think about their licenses, they're just thinking about, oh, I need a finance system. But that's the point of, well, actually, if we start thinking differently, we can start getting more from this earlier, because that finance implementation, I've never seen one quicker than 8 months. So it's 8 months of investment of licenses that are unused, on top of all the consultancy and the support, having people like myself and yourself coming in. They could be doing something as well with that. And that's that 360 challenge to say, is it my job or your job to turn to them and say, actually, while we're doing this, why don't you start doing this? Why don't you start getting some early realisation? Because when that project gets complicated, and when you're in this design and they're saying, but I don't like that, I don't want to use standard here, or it takes a bit longer because you've got delays, rather than them focusing on the delays, you can say, well, actually, look at these apps and this automation your team's done. Because they're getting some benefits. These long-winded programs are really complicated and difficult for customers because they just feel like they never end. We do this as a day job, but they don't. They just want to get back to the normal day job, and they want it to be easier at the end of it. And when you go through this project, it just feels like it's so difficult. You know, I'm just buying this system. Why doesn't it just work? Why can't you? Done. And this is starting that, you know. So we are about to wrap up, and I will get told off if I go on any longer. But thank you all for joining us today, and again, thank you to all of our sponsors for letting us all be here today. I hope you took something of interest from this session, and I'll be around, hovering around for a bit if anyone wants to continue the conversation. And I'm also here for the rest of the weekend. If you want to catch, say hi, you know, or have a beer if anyone's around later, because we all definitely will be. And yeah, just reach out if you need anything from me. I'm happy to support you. So thank you very much to everyone.